Los Angeles, the city of angels. Sprawling across America's most populous county, its roots stretch back centuries, before Jamestown was ever even a whisper. From sun-baked deserts to mountain peaks, this is a land of dreams and endless possibility. The story of Los Angeles is woven with triumph and conflict. Where native tribes once thrived, empires rose and fell, leaving echoes in the very heart of the metropolis. Hollywood painted silver screen fantasies, while freeways unfurled a tangle of ambition. Join us on the story Los Angeles as we unfurl its vibrant history. We'll explore the glories, the shadows, and the spirit that relentlessly forged the city we know today. This is the heartbeat of Los Angeles, past, present, and future. Last time on The Story, Los Angeles. California becomes a state. The discovery of gold spurs the mass migration of hundreds of thousands. And law and order is brought to Los Angeles with a city map and the newly formed General City Council. Los Angeles, a symbol of dreams, sunshine, and endless possibility. But under the glitz and glamour lies a long history of simmering racial tensions, woven into the very fabric of the city. From the early massacre of Chinese to the Zoot Suit, Watts, and Rodney King riots, it's a history that often remains hidden, whispered about, but seldom confronted head-on. Today, we're stepping behind the facade and peeling back the layers of time to examine racial tensions that shaped the early days of Los Angeles in the 1800s, when tensions between the Pobladores and Anglos, Chinese and Irish, came to a head, setting the stage for a tumultuous cycle of racial conflict in the city. This is The Story, Los Angeles. Episode 3. Early Race Wars in the City of Angels. From the original indigenous inhabitants, the Tongva people, to successive waves of Spanish colonizers, Mexican settlers, and eventually a global melting pot of immigrants, Los Angeles has always been a city of incredible diversity. However, that diversity hasn't always meant equality or harmony. As noted in episode 1, some of the first markers of racial tension can be traced back to the Spanish conquest and the establishment of the mission system. The subjugation of Native American Tongvas and the forced imposition of European culture were early sources of inequality and tension. After the Mexican-American War, instead of natives, the Spanish and Mexican inhabitants became the new second-class citizens. As the state grew in population, the Spanish-speaking inhabitants were quickly outnumbered, and their culture slowly Americanized. Baseball replaced bullfights. Public institutions like schools and jails were constructed, and banks and Protestant churches found their footing. But this wasn't to say Los Angeles was at all becoming civil. The city's continued growth in the wake of the California gold rush meant intense competition for resources. Chinese and Irish immigrants arrived in search of a better life, only to find prejudice and resentment, especially in the labor market. In addition, Stockton and Fremont's army that captured Los Angeles for America were made up of largely volunteers from New York's Bowery and Five Points neighborhoods. At the time, the most dangerous neighborhoods in the nation, with violence often following racial lines. Many of those army members stayed and contributed to extreme violence in a new neighborhood in Los Angeles, Calle de los Negros, or Street of the Blacks, named for the dark-skinned Mexican pobladores who settled there. With the invention of the six-shot revolver by Samuel Colt, shootings and violence in the city skyrocketed. Prominent lawyers and one of the city's mayors were even involved in shootings and lynching, with little to no impact on their societal standing. The city was in shambles. Amid the violence, stray dogs took over the streets. The mother ditch or irrigation channel had become a laundry station and a public toilet. And unpaved roads were pure dust in the dry season and completely impassable when the rains created mud. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were times of both massive expansion and deep societal fracture for Los Angeles. By 1860, while the city now had a map, a city plan thanks to Lieutenant Ord's survey, and rudimentary legal codes, enforcement and public safety was lacking. The city had only 6 police officers for an estimated 5,000 residents and untold visitors passing through on their way to find their prosperity in the Golden State. With a lack of police, rogue organizations soon formed to create their own laws. The Los Angeles Rangers were a band of 23 armed men on horseback who exerted their own justice where police could not, focusing their sights on Latinos and native Tongvas. Latinos responded in kind by creating their own banditos, roaming groups who regularly burglarized homes, businesses, and banks. Shifting alliances between Latinos, Tongvas, and Anglos created bloody clashes between the groups, at one point resulting in the slaughter of the sheriff and 6 of his deputies. But there was one commonality between the natives, the Anglos, and the Latinos. These communities uniformly rejected Chinese immigrants. This xenophobia fueled resentment towards the unfamiliar Chinese cultural practices, which were misunderstood and used to justify discrimination. Within their own ranks, Chinese immigrants, lured by the promise of golden opportunity, found themselves trapped in a bloody battle for power, money, and survival within their own community. Known today as the Tong Wars, differing factions within the Chinese community created a power struggle throughout California. Following the California Gold Rush, thousands of Chinese men arrived, fueled by hopes of building a better life. But dreams quickly soured. Racist and anti-Chinese legislation restricted their endeavors, relegating them to menial labor and overcrowded conditions within the growing Chinatown district of Los Angeles. These marginalized communities gave rise to Tongs, social organizations initially forged for mutual support and cultural preservation. Yet, in the harsh realities of LA's underbelly, some Tongs succumbed to vice and criminal activity. And soon, what began as a network of brotherhood turned into a battleground for dominance. Tongs established a stranglehold on gambling dens, opium trade, and prostitution rackets. Clashes over territory and women were common, fueled by deep-seated rivalries and lucrative illicit trades. It's important to note that any time a group of people are rejected from society, often their only means for survival are illegal activities. If rejected groups cannot participate in the day-to-day life of the community, they must, for survival, turn elsewhere to make ends meet, putting pressure on the community itself, requiring its own self-law enforcement mechanisms. And so, extortion of Chinese-owned businesses became rampant. Protection money exchanged hands, sometimes under the guise of legitimate membership dues to the Tongs. Those who resisted suffered consequences: beatings, arsons, or even a deadly visit from the Bu Hao Doi, the Tong's feared community enforcers. In 1860, all Chinese were unified in one society. But as opportunities dwindled due to anti-Chinese legislation and rampant racism, the community began to divide itself in an attempt to protect their own interests. With limited economic opportunities, the Chinese community, primarily composed of men, often turned to illicit activities to fund their life in the New World. Tensions reached a fever pitch in 1871 during an explosive shootout on Calle de los Negros. The infamous Chinese massacre, ignited by a feud over a woman, led to a mob storming Chinatown, indiscriminately murdering 19 residents of Chinese descent. In the time, men often brought younger Chinese women to the States, married them for legal purposes, but ultimately utilized them for prostitution. The events leading up to the deadly 1871 shooting involved a young woman named Yat Ho, who was married to an older Chinese man from the Nin faction, using her for prostitution. But she was in love with a younger man from the Hongqiao faction in San Francisco, whom she also had married. In court, a judge ruled she was to remain with her younger lover from Hongqiao and upheld their marriage certificate, nullifying the older Nin man's claim. With no other legal recourse, the factions went to war. Professional hitmen from the Hongqiao faction arrived in Los Angeles by steamboat from San Francisco after Yat Ho had been stolen by the older Chinese man. LA's Chinese community was well aware of the risk, and in the days leading up to their arrival had purchased over 50 handguns in anticipation of a pending conflict. The local Nin faction in Los Angeles shot first at an encounter on Black Alley, killing one of the San Francisco hitmen and resulting in a shootout between the factions. Hearing the gunshots, police soon arrived, but one officer and a saloon keeper who ran to his aid, both Anglos, were accidentally shot and killed on the scene. At that moment, racial tensions exploded. Anglos, hearing the gunfire and seeing the white officer and saloon keepers dead, became enraged and formed a mob of almost 500 men. All the mob perceived was Chinese Tong members killing an Anglo police officer and business owner. They were not aware of the nuances of the rivaling factions, and despite most of the Hongqiao escaping back to San Francisco, the angry mob indiscriminately attacked all Chinese in the city. Even a respected doctor, Shilong Tong, who begged for his life, was lynched. Chinese businesses were looted, and in the end, 19 Chinese, or 10% of the Chinese population at the time, were dead. The next day, the city awoke somber and disgraced to the remains of the slaughter. Blood on the streets, nooses strewn about. The massacre became a global news story, tarnishing the name of Los Angeles and raising calls for the city to be placed under martial law. This was the first race riot in the city's history, one of many to come as the city grew and became a melting pot of cultures and ethnicities. While public outrage over the massacre briefly quelled the violence, the roots of the Tong Wars continued to fester. It took the devastating 1906 San Francisco earthquake, which destroyed much of Chinatown, including Tong centers, and persistent efforts from reformers to diminish overt Tong violence. Many of them gradually rebranded, moving towards legitimate businesses and focusing on community support. However, echoes of the Tongs reverberate in the underworld of organized crime, even today. A ghostly reminder of the darker aspects of LA's immigrant history. But the story of LA's Tong Wars is more than just violence and underworld intrigues. It's a story of immigrant struggle, discrimination, and the constant fight for a foothold in a society that sought to push them out. Through understanding this tumultuous period, we can hopefully avoid repeating its lessons in our own time. Next time on The Story, Los Angeles. A Tale of Two Harbors. The Transcontinental Railroad comes to town, and what goes boom must go bust. The Story Los Angeles is a free podcast written and produced by David Ryan. Free student and teacher resources are available at thestory.la. Hey there, listener. If you love this episode of The Story, subscribing or donating is the best way to help us keep uncovering the past. Your support lets us create more incredible podcasts and provide amazing free resources to teachers and students nationwide. Learn more, subscribe, or donate at thestory.la.